I finished Imposter Factory, I don't know, a week ago when I'm writing this. I feel like I've just been busy, but I plan to do this right after I finish the game, which is basically the day that it came out. But, normally I would sit on something like this for a while before getting my thoughts out, but in this case, this is a very unique case, and I'd have to sit with this for probably way longer than is reasonable to get, like, an authentic reaction out of it, so here goes. For now, this is a review based on finishing the game once through. I haven't really gone back to it that much in terms of the content. I've thought about it a lot. Perhaps in a few weeks or months or so, I'll have some new thoughts about this game and a lot more. Maybe I'll feel like I have a better image of it in my head, but that won't be reflective of how most people would probably consume this piece of media if they consume it anywhere close to how I do. So I already put way more time and effort into understanding a piece of media before judging it than most people on the planet. So when I say that trying to wrap my head around this game until I feel actually satisfied sounds like too much work to do right now, then there's no way that 95% of players would put that extra effort into this after finishing the game. That's why making my review now makes the most sense to inform other people. I'll try to avoid spoilers, but I really won't, and I just lied. I will just talk about whatever I want to talk about. Luckily, on that front, because I feel so unconfident in my own understanding of this game's, like, fucking everything, like what the plot is suggesting or what the point of it all was, I don't feel the need to spoil that much of anything because I'm not sure what is even that important or not. In any case, I think I really enjoyed this game. One thing that To the Moon and Finding Paradise have is kind of like, I don't know, they have a sense of humor about them that in the moment actually does make you laugh, but later on or retroactively you kind of doubt the value of the humor because it also feels kind of juvenile, you know? That's the sense, I guess, at least. I came into this game expecting the humor to be a little flat and cringeworthy, but it's not. It's actually very funny the whole way through, and I was just being a pessimistic asshole for no reason. As for the main story, which is of course the primary selling point, I was engaged and hooked on it the whole way through, although my natural expectations impacted how much I felt for much of the runtime. I was expecting to play as Neil the whole game, like the previous games, and in a way, I think that has an impact on the emotional weight of the story. I think To the Moon has fantastic emotional weight, very complex characters, and in general, it's just phenomenal, but relatively straightforward character study / mystery story, kind of. I think playing as the two doctors makes the most sense for this format, because the whole story of Johnny's life in To the Moon gets to be dramatic and serious even from the very start, but you don't get the problem. It doesn't feel over dramatic for characters that you haven't grown an attachment to yet, because you're just playing as doctors who also don't really care that much. They're just doing their jobs. So you get the added benefits that you can see something that you objectively understand to be dramatic, but you're not forced into caring about it because you understand the tone is not that serious for the actual the weird meta suggestions. I only played Finding Paradise a single time, and I don't really remember it all that well. I've been meaning to play it again. I wanted to before this game came out, but I just didn't get around to it. I've been busy. But I recall that it had a clear change from To the Moon. It felt less straightforwardly emotional and much more philosophically vague and abstract. It was harder to emotionally appreciate right away, and it was much more confusing than To the Moon, both in terms of the actual plot and what the story was going for thematically, and with its various philosophical complexities and gray areas and whatnot. This game is yet another step in that direction. I felt very little emotional connection to this story, but I find my brain fucking melting trying to wrap it around the extremely abstract story and how I'm supposed to tie everything together to make sense of it cleanly. There's a ton of philosophical debate in this game that I found very interesting to watch in the moment, but it's hard for me to take all the individual elements and see what the overarching package is doing, and so I can't say cleanly that I loved the story of this game, because more than anything, I just feel very confused and uncertain about it. You know those stories that you finish them and then you just feel kind of hollow? Like you don't get a sense of thematic closure or clarity, or maybe you are really satisfied with the experience, but you're just like, well, now you got to do something else, So you just sit there not really sure how to feel at all. It's very much like that. I felt shitty after I beat it. That's all I know for sure, is that I felt really bad. Not sad or emotional like I was relating to something in narrative, but just like empty bad. Like the pieces of the puzzle weren't quite clicking together, and I felt like I should have a sense of closure, but I didn't. I just felt general philosophical dissatisfaction, which in turn affected my whole mood. It was very depressing, not in like a BoJack sort of a way where the plot is depressing or it has a harsh tone. It just actually makes you depressed because you feel like, what the fuck was the point of all of this? And it balloons so much, it feels like, what the fuck is the point of anything when you're done with it? You haven't been given a clear answer to anything. And I mean it, like I'm chronically depressed, and I felt super shitty after beating this game. I didn't want to go to work the next day. I didn't feel like doing jack shit. But that's probably more of a me thing than anything, so, but be fair warned anyways. But again, I don't want to scare people off or imply, necessarily, because I'm glad that I played it, and the entire process of playing it was engaging. I don't have a negative word to say against this game at all. It was super, I have negative words to say against everything, but it was super interesting. It kept me watching the whole way through. I think this is why Finding Paradise wasn't as big of a huge hit, on the internet, as To the Moon was originally. Partially because it's a sequel, but partially because Finding Paradise is much more abstract and less straightforwardly emotional, And that's not for lack of emotional elements, but the actual emotions themselves are more complex, so you have to understand the story much better before you can actually relate to those complexities that the story is trying to convey. I definitely find the story more emotional now than when I first played it, and I was just so baffled through this entire, third video game, or fourth, or whichever one it is in the series, just trying to keep up with, what the story was throwing at me, that it didn't feel like much of anything. This game feels like that, but even more intense, obviously. It was obvious from the beginning that it would have, time travel / simulation, multiple reality-esque philosophical mechanics to its story, so I was prepared for confusing complexities. I'm used to that kind of story, but I feel like the actual goings-on weren't explained to me very well in the end. There were definitely some lines that I read them over and over, and I just didn't understand what they were trying to say to me. So I don't entirely perceive exactly what happened in this game and why it was done, but mainly it's just the thematic implications of the game that baffle and confuse me. One thing I feel more confident in criticizing, at least relative to the first two mainline games in the series, is the protagonist. Like I said, playing as the Doctors makes perfect sense in terms of how to structure your writing, because you have a casual lens through which you can immediately start studying all the dramatic moments of a character's life. In this game, you play as a character with very little personality, who rarely ever talks at all or expresses any thoughts. I find Quincy's role as the protagonist interesting in an overarching sort of way, but also somewhat contradictory, because he's not really the focus of the story at all. In the first two games, you played as the Doctors and their patient that's being studied. But in this game, the character being studied isn't the protagonist, and there are no doctors observing the process at all. They're not in the plot. Instead, you play as this kind of bystander character with very little to add to anything happening. But the fact that you play as him has more bizarre and abstract implications in the narrative now that I'm thinking about it, I won't criticize what I feel like I don't fully understand, but in terms of the emotional arc of the story, not playing as the Doctors with their kind of callous indifference to the drama they're watching definitely affects the emotional arc. Like, in To the Moon, you don't really care about Johnny all that much at first. You relate to and care about Neil, your character you're playing as, way more. So when he eventually starts to get emotional over his patient, you relate to him. You care because Neil cares, because you like Neil and buy into his gradual attachment to his patient. In this game, anything emotional feels too abstract to feel a clear emotion on it. maybe not abstract, but like somewhat contradictory, and or is like kind of surface level, like just like the events that you are aware played out in someone's life, more so than anything beyond that. Also, of course, people that loved Neil in the first 2 games, like myself, will be starkly disappointed that he basically is not in this game at all. It pretty much just follows Lynn, and to a lesser extent, Quincy, your protagonist. Any characters we know are nowhere to be seen in this sequel. There also isn't a vocal track from Shigehara like in the first 2 games. I'm not really sure what she's been up to since finishing Rakuen, but I hope she's working on more stuff. She's a really great creative all around. She tends to add a more down-to-earth dramatic element to her work than Kangao does, I've found. Not that that's necessarily better, but I do think I enjoyed and appreciated Rakuen a little bit more than this game. The fact that I have so little emotional attachment to these characters means that I'm a little bit less motivated to go back, replay, and try to understand the story beyond just like the burning, crippling feeling of things not quite clicking to my satisfaction. Actually, post-editing Phosphorescence here, I just checked, because I was curious. I didn't realize that Shigehara has actually been working on Deltarune. I was hoping that she was working on a brand new game, but that's cool too. For a long time, I've thought of To the Moon and Finding Paradise as, like, kind of like a formula for an anthology series of sorts, in that it's a very strong concept that could be repeated over and over and over with different applications and ideas, different examinations of this universe, the concept of this semi-sci-fi universe where doctors with advanced technology go to replace the memories of people with fake memories that allow them to mentally create their idealized life before they die, is like inherently fascinating. Because you always get to see the person's complex life and story while they feel why they feel the dissatisfaction, why they might want to change their memories of their own life, and you also get like this infinite possibilities for the bizarre philosophical implications of creating false memories for people to fully believe in but while on their deathbeds. Finding Paradise is a clear example of how diverse the concept really is, because it's not like To the Moon at all, where we follow a relatively straightforward character study of their patient Johnny. Finding Paradise is this weird pseudo-piece on the human condition relative to this unique setting with this unique fictional technology, how it might be manipulated and how its existence would impact human perception of their own satisfaction in life, knowing that it might all be replaced with implanted memories on their deathbeds, knowing that their own memories might be falsified. A much more abstract take on the concept that is harder to relate to because it is much more dependent on this unique fictional setting. Imposter Factory, once again, like I said, is this, but even more extreme. Its conflicts and ideas are very, very, very dependent on the unique setting that the game takes place in. As such, it's much harder to relate to the philosophical and emotional concepts to real life. But it's also more novel and fascinating / exhausting to think about because it requires so much more out-of-the-box thinking and imagination to entertain the idea of, I guess I'll say. I know that I sound like I'm kind of split on the game. Like, there are some things that I like some things but dislike others, so I feel kind of reluctantly middle of the road. And that's how I sound, but that's not the case. I had very strong reactions and feelings to this game in a philosophical sense, so I don't think this game is an average experience at all, or like, good but flawed. I think it's very strong. I'm just not sure if it's something you could just play and, love it, like other games. Does that make sense? I definitely recommend this game so that people can get whatever they get out of it, but I doubt other people react to it with as much fucking, mental instability as I did. It's such a bizarre experience. Anyways, while I was playing through the game, I had a criticism about the lack of exploration relative to the previous games and the fact that you're mostly just going straight from one scene to the next scene without being able to look around and pick up smaller, more subtle details. But since I now know that the story is so fucking batshit insane, I don't know if I feel the same way now. I definitely think I'd prefer if the game had less moving from one scene to the next, because it kind of ends up being like half of your time is spent watching the scenes that are often very short, and the other half of the time is spent walking from the one scene to the next, or some animation or some loading screen or something. So it feels like meaningless wastes of time between story morsels that could have been reduced somewhat. And I prefer the level of detail that goes into the much more subtle inclusions in To the Moon, especially. It feels very rewarding to understand more and more of the story each time by noticing some tiny little detail that you never stopped and pieced together before. I can't even really say if I liked this game more or less than the previous ones in the series, because it's so bizarre, and I don't know what to take away from it. I feel like people who aren't as anal about themes and consistency will just play this and not question it all that much. You know, it'll probably just be like a weird story with some mystery elements and some kind of charming characters, but I feel like this game clearly has a lot to say. I just can't make out what its conclusions or suggested complexities are. This is only possible in a game that has really complex thematic implications. If it was actually just a simple story with straightforward themes, or just messy themes, I wouldn't even bother mentioning them. In any case, this is a very unique game. You won't get this kind of shit anywhere else, so play it if it intrigues you. And despite the game not featuring prominently a ton of classic characters in the series, it would be beyond impossible, absolutely fucking impossible, to play this game without having first played To the Moon and then Finding Paradise. And also probably some other shit, like the side episodes and the sub-episodes and such. But yeah, that's my thoughts on it.